think we're going to go ahead and start. And it looks like there's some more people that are going to trickle in, but we'll want to respect your guys' time here. So, let's go ahead. So I met most of you this morning at the ethics panel. This is actually going to go more in depth on the work that we've been trying to do looking at marijuana for PTSD. And so I'm going to give you a basic overview of the actual study design and how marijuana research is conducted, just so you can get a glimpse of that. So as I mentioned before, my name is Sisley, and I'm a physician from Arizona. This is a service dog that I'm training. And I basically, I do internal medicine and psychiatry. I'm double boarded. So I do mostly primary care just for seriously mentally ill patients. And I have, just so you know, I've never tried marijuana personally. I'm not part of the marijuana industry. I don't even prescribe it. I don't get money I don't own dispensaries or any of that. But I have worked at the VA for many years after, I've been taking care of veterans for about 20 years now, the soldiers. And I was working at the University of Arizona College of Medicine for about 10 years before we got terminated from there. But I was doing a lot of I had to become an activist in order to promote, in order to implement our study, which we felt there was such a dire need to understand what marijuana might do for PTSD. So we ended up, formulating a very big political strategy. We got all kinds of media attention for the last 6 months after I've been fired. Everybody has, we've been very fortunate that all these media outlets have wanted to cover this situation. They felt it was such a big injustice. And if you guys are watching the Sanjay Gupta, Weeds 1 and Weeds 2, if you're going to see in April, Weeds 3 comes out. And it's supposed to be all about our saga, me getting fired and the quest to continue, to persevere and get this study underway. But, the good news is I got fired in June of last year, and after that, I partnered with Johns Hopkins on the protocol, and I got a $2 million grant from the Colorado Health Department. So I'd say it was the best comeback story of 2014. And basically, the Colorado Health Department gave out about $9 million in research funds. The good news about this money is this is the first time a government agency has ever given money for efficacy research, for looking at the effectiveness of marijuana. So typically, the government will only fund studies looking at the harmful side effects of marijuana or the abuse potential of marijuana. So you can see these projects were all funded by the health department. Ours was the top point scorer only because we were the furthest along. We'd spent years now hurdling all these federal obstacles in order to get to the place where we are now. But you can see they're evaluating a variety of different illnesses here. And let's take a look. So ours is going to be the first and only randomized controlled trial in the world looking at the use of whole plant marijuana for treating PTSD. And you see here that this is the reason that we're so motivated to get this study done, because there's a huge mortality rate associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, that there's very few good treatments for it, as we talked about this morning. All we have basically Zoloft and Paxil, that's it. And then of course, the prevalent, this is the real issue for us. The epidemic of veteran suicide is a really serious problem in the United States, where we're losing. So this is actually a low estimate. I'll give you an example. I just lost a patient the other day. He killed himself, but it was labeled an accident. He drove his motorcycle 100 miles an hour into a barricade, and it was labeled an accident. That's what happens in the U.S. So many of these suicides are labeled accidents when I know full well this patient was actively suicidal. So this number is probably half of what the real number is, but it's already a horrific number, a horrific statistic. So this is it. You know, this is all we have to treat PTSD in the United States. These two medicines are very disappointing to veterans. They rarely work, and then they have a lot of side effects. You know, Paxil is a drug that I use. I take care of some patients in the prison system, and we actually use it to treat pedophiles, you know, to help suppress their libido, their sex drive. And, you know, and so this is what we're giving to veterans who are, the soldiers who are coming back from combat, trying to reintegrate into their family, to be part of the, you know, reconnect with their spouse, and we're causing them all this weight gain and sexual dysfunction. But this isn't it. I mean, these are the two meds that are actually on label with the FDA. The fact is that we pummel these veterans with every medicine on the market that we can find. So slowly, these vets end up getting put on 10, 15 different prescriptions. They call it a combat cocktail, right? It's unfortunate that psychiatry has not advanced further, where, you know, we have this situation where we still use a different pill, a different prescription for each target symptom. And we know that PTSD is so complex. It's got a, you know, vast myriad of target symptoms. And so you can imagine how quickly these veterans, you know, this snowballs, where the vet comes in and says, I can't sleep, and they get put on a sleep med. And then I'm depressed, and they get put on Paxil. And then they say, you know, I have a lot of anxiety, and they get put on a benzo, some Valium or Ativan. And then, I'm hearing voices, I'm paranoid all the time. They get put on an antipsychotic. You can see how quickly that can snowball, where the patient, you know, within the course of a year, suddenly they're on 10 different prescriptions. Whereas that's why the veterans are becoming so fascinated with the notion of marijuana as medicine. And many of the veterans are fundamentally opposed to this. They don't want to be on an illegal drug, what they perceive as illegal. But they realize that the meds that we're offering them aren't helping. I'm part of this. I put them through the gauntlet of every conventional medicine on the market, and nothing helps. And then these patients start experimenting with marijuana on their own. But this is why, you know, this is what it's about, right? So we have so many soldiers returning from these various conflicts around the world with PTSD, that we're paying out tons of money each year. This is just for 2010. In 2013, we paid over $7 billion in disability payouts for PTSD. And this statistic is actually a low estimate also. The number of homeless veterans, you know, veterans who can't find housing or mentally ill and choose to be homeless is really brutal. But this has been a big help. People like Sanjay Gupta are highlighting the fact that we have a very legitimate prescription overdose epidemic in this country. Just in Arizona, just in my state alone, we had 1,700 deaths from prescription drug overdose. And you can see there that the veteran population, the military veterans, this happens to them 33% more often than the regular population. So, and that's just because, you know, vets have so much access to very heavily controlled drugs. You know, our veterans are given mega dosages of opioids and benzos and everything in order to stabilize their PTSD, to keep them from suicide. And instead they end up, you know, overdosing anyway. And a lot of people have been referring to this JAMA article. I think this was really crucial, that we're starting to show a correlation in the states that have medical marijuana law, that they're seeing a lower death rate from opioid overdose. So that this is terrific. It's terrific news, and I think it's just going to continue to crystallize. The data is going to look more and more impressive over the next few years. This is, you know, we've been really lucky again that the media has been highlighting the fact that the meds that are currently available are not working, that they often give these veterans huge, huge side effects. And here you can see that this is how I got involved, because I was actually, you know, I'm trained in a very conservative medical model where you don't believe that anything except FDA-approved meds are appropriate. And so it took me a long time to come to the point where I'm actually, you know, curious about marijuana as medicine. I never really embraced that idea, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I just had one veteran after another telling me, you know, reluctantly disclosing to me that they were benefiting from their use of the plant, that it had a calming effect on them, that it enabled them to get out of the house finally, to go, you know, that they could go to a grocery store without having a panic attack. And so that's how I started to learn from the patients. I finally let, you know, rather than chastising them and begging them to stop the marijuana, I realized, you know, I started listening to them finally and said, wow, this is really impressive. And they've taught me most of what I know about marijuana by listening to their stories about, you know, what strains they're using and how they use it, or the delivery methods and all of this. And so these are the symptoms that they've reported to me that they are, seem to be benefiting from the medicine. No, none of the veterans are arguing it's a cure. That's really important. I want to emphasize that no PTSD patients are saying that marijuana cures PTSD, but for symptom control of those symptoms, it seems to be highly effective. But it all remains to be tested. That's what our study is about. And so this is, you know, everybody's been talking about this, but I think it's really, this is, for me, was helped me explain to my colleagues, my very skeptical fellow doctors, about the fact there is a legitimate biologic underpinning for why marijuana is legitimate as medicine. And it's this system, the endocannabinoid system, discovered by Refi, has been critical in getting a buy-in from the mainstream medical community. So really pleased to learn about that. And as we talk, you know, so many folks have discussed this already, but let's just talk a little bit more about this. So, you know, the marijuana plant is so complex, right? We've learned already it's got, you know, 100 different phytocannabinoids in it, and they're all working together synergistically to create what we now describe as the entourage effect, right? So all these cannabinoids working together. The two primary cannabinoids that we talk about the most right now are THC, and then, of course, CBD now is a huge area of research. So cannabidiol seems to be, you know, it's interesting because it seems to buffer some of the negative side effects of THC, and that can be really valuable. So, so let me take a look here. I'm going to show you this. So yeah, what we're interested in here is that CBD not only may reduce the anxiety associated with high THC strains, but that it also seems to, CBD or cannabidiol seems to reduce the activation in the amygdala, and the amygdala plays a big part in promoting post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you can quell the, calm the amygdala activation, then you might be able to address PTSD. But remember that marijuana is short-acting. That's why it's only really for symptom control. It's not a cure. It just will help as long as the marijuana is in the bloodstream. So yeah, so this is where we came up with our study then, is because we want to understand how varying ratios of THC and CBD might help with these PTSD patients. And this is another aspect of our study. We're going to be looking at inflammation. So we have a team at UC Denver, at the University of Colorado in Denver, Dr. Lowry, who is an expert in this. He's identified these biomarkers that are measurements of inflammation. And what he's already showed in some earlier studies is that people with PTSD have high levels of these different biomarkers, like IL-6. And then if you if you cure PTSD, if PTSD goes into remission, these biomarkers, these markers for inflammation seem to go down. So this is what we're interested in, that THC and CBD seem to have potent anti-inflammatory action, and we think that we'll be able to see some changes in the patients with PTSD. So this will be assessed. We'll be looking at their the inflammation at baseline, and then again at 3 weeks, and again at the end of the study to see where that's at. So yeah, so this is basically talking about the elegant interrelationship between CBD and THC. And this is really important concept, that CBD actually competes at the CB1 receptor. That may be the explanation for why CBD seems to reduce the negative side effects of THC. They're competing for the same receptor, and thus they can, you know, decrease some of the damage, the problems with THC. And that's why we're so interested in studying whole plant marijuana. There's plenty of folks, including, you know, pharmaceutical companies, that want to study receptor level, you know, isolate cannabinoids and put them into pill form. Our goal is to try to study raw marijuana in its natural form and try to put that through the entire FDA drug development process. So I'm going to show you how that's going to work here. So this is the picture I showed this morning, but I think it's just a great illustration of what our veterans are dealing with. Soldiers coming back from war, they end up, you know, drowning in pills and pill bottles, unable to function. They describe feeling like a zombie, like they're impossible for them to possibly, you know, to reintegrate into their community. And yet here he's, you know, grabbing onto a marijuana joint as a survival technique. That's what veterans are describing over and over again. And so, but yet when they go to our VA hospitals, they're treated like drug addicts. They're, you know, they're terminated from the program. So if you're a veteran in the United States and you go and you have a urine that's positive for marijuana, in the past, you were actually terminated from your pain program, so you wouldn't be allowed to receive any more opioids. Now, the good news is that the VA recently changed that policy and said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. If you have a medical marijuana card and you're, you know, using it legally, then we will keep you in your pain program. We won't withhold opioid pain pills. Unfortunately, though, they've already rolled back that. You know, so certain VAs around the country, VA hospitals, have already stopped acknowledging that policy, and they're already, you know, again, harassing these veterans and forcing them to go off their pain pills. There's no reason that a veteran couldn't be on pain meds and take some adjunctive marijuana treatment. So it's really sad that these guys are forced to pick one or the other. But what's been fascinating to everyone, what people have talked about over the last couple days, is marijuana substitution, and the fact that many of the veterans are replacing some of the really highly addictive meds for use of for marijuana only in some cases. So this is our study. Basically, this is a very broad collaboration. So MAPS is my sponsor. They've been my sponsor for the last 5 years. They're a nonprofit organization based out of Santa Cruz. And MAPS and I have been working on, you know, navigating all the federal obstacles for all these years. And only recently, after I got fired, we were able to bring on all these new collaborators. So now we have the University of Colorado, we have Johns Hopkins, we have UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, and all of these guys are experts in marijuana research. They've been doing it for years. They've been doing the government's research. So they've been studying the safety of marijuana, which means, you know, the harmful side effects of marijuana or the abuse potential of marijuana. So now finally they are excited for an opportunity to study the effectiveness of marijuana. How you, oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. They claim to be excited. Maybe they're just excited about the grant. That could be, yeah. Let's see. So, yeah, so we're going to be looking at 76 veterans, and they all have treatment-resistant PTSD, right? So they have to have failed medications and failed psychotherapy in order to even be eligible. And then I'll show you this. So basically, this is how it's going to work, right? It's a randomized controlled trial, and we said a multi-site study. So basically these 76 veterans are split between 2 sites. My site in Arizona, wherever I land, I still haven't figured out. I was hoping to still find a hospital or a university to pick me up, but it hasn't. I've been officially blackballed from every institution. So I probably will be functioning as a completely unaffiliated site, which is fine. I think we'll be able to prove that research can be done much more efficiently and less expensively by doing it outside of a university. So the other half of the study, the other 38 veterans, will be enrolled at Johns Hopkins. So I'll be enrolling 38 in Arizona. Baltimore will be enrolling 38 veterans, and we will be looking at 4 treatment arms, right? Four different ratios of THC and CBD. So one of those arms is a placebo arm, 0% THC. It's actually made by our federal government. So NIDA makes a plant, you know, it takes the marijuana plant and alcohol washes it, leaches out all of the cannabinoids. So it's 0% THC, 0% all other cannabinoids. So it looks the same as marijuana, smells the same, all that, but it doesn't have any cannabinoids in it. And then, oh yeah. And it doesn't. Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, I think if someone's an experienced user, I suspect they're going to know pretty quick that it's not real. And the good news is, though, that in the second stage of this, they will be re-randomized into a different treatment arm. So yeah, so basically we're looking at therapeutic potential here for marijuana, and we are going to let's see. Let me jump to the next slide here. Let me show you this. Oh, I was just going to mention the triple blind. So it's a triple blind randomized controlled trial. You don't get to see that, but usually they talk about double blind. So we've reinforced this further to make sure that there's no bias that enters into the study. By basically everybody's blinded. That's what I try to tell our opponents. The opponents of this research think that, you know, somehow we're going to thwart the data to make marijuana look good. We have no interest in that. We're trying to collect objective data on does marijuana work or not. And so that's why we triple blinded it, just to make sure that nobody would know the identity of the drug versus placebo. And this is the breakdown. So let me show you this. So basically, we're going to be looking at each of these different strains, different ratios of THC and CBD. This is how NIDA forces us to do this. So they can't tell you exactly what percentage you're going to get yet. So the only thing you can do is request these ranges. You can see here, high is defined as 12 to 15%, right? So the high THC is going to be somewhere between 12 to 15% THC. High CBD will be the same thing. It'll be 12 to 15% CBD. And then they have a 1-to-1 ratio that they haven't grown yet. That's what's taking so long. They don't know how to grow CBD-rich marijuana. So we're waiting for now 10 months for them to figure this out. And then, of course, we have the placebo. So let's see here. So, and then, of course, the pre-stage stuff. Okay, so before 1 and 2, we're going to have these 2 4-hour safety sessions where we actually administer study drug for the first time to patients. So, so during these safety sessions, we're going to be monitoring their vital signs. We're going to be checking for adverse events. You know, if somebody's new to marijuana, they might actually have, you know, if they get put on high THC right? They might have a panic attack. They might have a psychotic episode. So we're going to be there for those 4 hours to monitor it and document it. They'll certainly be allowed to exit the study if they.
Same study patients with previous experience and without previous experience. This is a tough question.
Yeah.
This is so it's supposed to be very heterogeneous group. People with experience and without experience, they are different groups.
It's true. We thought about that, but we decided to purposely mix it because we didn't want to rule out somebody just because they were naive to marijuana. So we're just going to go ahead and document their personal history. And that way, when we do the data analysis later, after we unblind the study, we'll be able to correlate some of that material and be able to figure it out. It's such a small cohort anyway. With my site only have, each site only has 38 patients. So it's going to be small, so we didn't want to rule that out. But we'll probably do a deeper phase 2 trial, and then once we narrow down what strains are best for these folks, and we'll be able to go into that kind of sophistication. This is stage 1 then. So what happens is they're given, so after they do their 2 safety sessions, first they're randomized into one of those 4 treatment arms. Let's say the patient is on 12% CBD, right? So then they go into the safety session, they're exposed to the study drug, they learn how to smoke it, and then they're given study drug to go home with, right? So they get a whole 1-week supply of marijuana that they take home in a bag, and they titrate it. So that's really important because a lot of the people said, oh, no, you got to have fixed dosing. Like we physicians, we'd like to have them on a specific dose. They take the same amount every day. But this is kind of what we felt is one of the benefits of marijuana, is that you don't need the same amount every day. And there are some days when veterans need very little or none, and some days where they need more. And we want people to use exactly what they need and not more than that. They're striving for symptom control only and not to get high or stoned. So that's the idea. So they're going to, each day they're allowed to take up to 2 grams. So each cigarette is about a gram from NIDA. They sell these, cigarettes. It's a 1 gram a piece, and so they get 2 cigarettes per day, and they're given that for the week. They adjust the dose at home, and then basically, let's see, and then after they're done with their 3 weeks of home self-titration, they end up going into a 2-week abstinence period. So that was really important to us, that we wanted to see what happens if veterans, these soldiers who are actively using marijuana for 3 straight weeks, what happens if we cut them off? We stop the study drug. Do their symptoms relapse? They end up getting right back to the flashbacks and the nightmares. And so we're going to be monitoring them actively during that abstinence period to see what happens. I know. It's hard to imagine.
For 2 weeks, full abstinence, from my experience.
It's true. I don't know if you guys are, Dr. Resnick is making a very legitimate point that we were worried about. It's that what veteran is going to agree to 2 weeks of abstinence after, being exposed to study drugs? And it's a very big concern for us. I mean, another problem is that the veterans, even before they're first screened, they have to have a negative urine when they come into the study. So that means if they were using marijuana throughout, then they have to wash off the study drug. So it's tough. I mean, if patients are benefiting from marijuana and they're forced to go a full month without marijuana just in order to get a negative urine, it's going to be tough. But the good news is we're going to be actively monitoring them during this abstinence period. So if they become suicidal, anything, we'll be there to provide the support. And it might, but this is why I think what's been surprising to me is that maybe it's just the veterans, inner constitution, the way that they function. I've been shocked at how many vets are willing to sign up for this study. We already have a long list of veteran volunteers who want to be part of it because they feel a sense of duty to their fellow vets to undergo this process and shed some light on this. And yeah, that's it, because first of all, they're not only subjecting this to the possibility they might get randomized to placebo. That's one problem. They also, like you said, they have to be abstinent the 30 days before. They might get on placebo, and they're forced to use marijuana from our federal government, which is terrible. Yeah, go ahead, huh?
This is already the moment for the...
Yeah, go ahead. No, keep going, yeah.
If you want to prove the effectiveness of marijuana
Yeah.
for these patients, then you need to have a group that has not already been on marijuana for a long time.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
in this small room. That is a problem if they come in and they have been using it for a long time already, and they only want to be safe in using it, that they won't have any more problems because of their use. That is another goal than the goal for your study. So I don't think that you can prove what you want to prove with this group.
Well, everybody starts with the negative urine drugs. You know what I mean? That nobody is going to be positive for marijuana going into the study. Yeah, so even if they're actively using, they have to wash off the marijuana for a full month prior to coming in.
Yeah, but you also must evaluate their psychological situation before and after.
That's
and they have been using the marijuana for so long, they are not the worst group of patients, I think. The ones that are worst off with their PTSD.
Right. But do you think, I don't see any long-lasting impact from people who are using marijuana. It seems like they're getting benefit as long as they actively use it, but the half-life of the drug is so short-acting that I don't think they're getting long-term. Even if they stopped it, they wouldn't be in a better position a month later than. But let's talk about that. Let me think about that, and we'll bring that up again. The other thing, so then after the stage 1, they're going to go to stage 2. At this point, they're re-randomized to a different dose. So if they were on high THC during stage 1, now they get re-randomized into maybe high CBD or the 1-to-1 mixture, 6% THC, 6% CBD. The good news is in stage 2, there's no more placebo control. So at least they're not going to get randomized onto placebo. If they were on placebo in stage 1, they'll get randomized into an active treatment arm. And then again, they go through the same process, 3 weeks of home self-titration and 2 weeks of abstinence once again. I'm sorry, does somebody have a question back there?
Yes, Dr. Sisley. Michael Krowitz, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. We've been working with Rick Doblin and MAPS and playing a supportive role, and very much Dr. Sisley is our hero. So thank you for your work. Just had a quick question really on the choice of treatment-resistant patients. I kind of understand the politics of that, but as far as actually getting a benefit from this research, do you think it is very portable to the larger patient populations? That is, if you're choosing only treatment-resistant patients, does that somehow make the results of this study less useful in thinking about larger patient populations?
No, it's a great point. Yeah, we hope that it will be generalizable because most of the patients I see are already considered treatment resistant. Even in my private practice, most of the people who have PTSD have already been through some type of treatment by the time they get to a psychiatrist. So I think that this will be easy to fit. There's certainly, it's pretty rare that I see someone who's never tried anything yet. So we'll see. But hopefully down the road we're going to get to studies like that too for people who are completely naive to treat. This is their initial diagnosis, and Even to qualify for this study, they have to have had a diagnosis of PTSD for at least 6 months. So they're gonna. So yeah, no, that's a good questions, you guys. And this is stage 3. This is kind of an interesting situation where each week they're given the study drug. They're asked to bring back their unused marijuana, and everybody's very skeptical about that. Like, what, are they really going to bring that back? But the reason they will bring it back is because we weigh the unused marijuana each week. We document the weight, and we put it back in the safe and save it for them so that during stage 3, they get all their unused marijuana back to them. And that gives them an incentive not to divert the drug, not to lie, you know, just give us it all back so we can understand how much you really need each week to manage your symptoms each day. So, yeah, so we're trying to make this like a real world study and understand what is this exactly that they need each week. And so this stage 3 is going to be, they get their unused marijuana back. They get intensive examination over then the next 6 months, basically. They have a 6-month intensive follow-up where we continue to monitor all their choices. This is my team. I'll just show you real quick. This is Marcel Von Miller from UPenn. He's a long time marijuana researcher with the VA system, which is great, having someone from the VA house. Ryan Vandry's done marijuana research with Johns Hopkins for a long time, and he's published extensively. Paula Riggs is just a perfect person for this study. She is a legit marijuana prohibitionist. She's so anti-marijuana. So it is great. She's an addictionologist. So perfect having somebody like this on our team. She is in charge of data integrity, which is a great role for her because she'll make sure that the data is unassailable and will be publishable later. And then, if the data looks favorable toward marijuana, she's going to have to help report this. She's going to be a co-author on our paper, so I'm really excited to have her involved. She's from the University of Colorado in Denver. And then Amy is our chief scientist over at MAPS out at Santa Cruz, and she's helping design all the IRB applications. This is our main outcome measure, is the CAP scale. If you guys probably have seen this, because if you've ever looked at any FDA studies that look at potential new drugs for PTSD, they all use CAPS. CAPS is the gold standard, clinician-administered PTSD scale. It requires an independent rater. It's a very expensive test. You got to pay. These independent raters are rare. You have to find them, and they're very costly. But it's the gold standard for evaluating the severity of PTSD. And then we have all these other battery of tests that we're going to do on these patients each week to make sure that they're not either they're getting better or they're deteriorating. This is all going to come into play, especially during the 2 weeks of abstinence, to see where things are at. And then, of course, safety, right? So we're going to, throughout the process, we're going to be monitoring them for adverse events. We'll be doing all kinds of medical screening, blood draws, and then, of course, looking for any problems that they have with the medicine. Yes, men and women. Yeah, we'll see. So far, we haven't had any women sign up, but it's just that we haven't advertised yet. We're not allowed until we have to finalize our IRB approval, and then they'll give us the guidelines about how we can advertise. And then, these are the things that we're doing to try to keep the subjects involved. We're calling them regularly. The PI has to call the patients and check in with them and evaluate them over the phone. We're going to be let me show you this next one. This is how we are going to end up recruiting, though. This is usually what the IRB will allow us to do. We have ads. We'll have an 800 number where veterans can call. Mostly going to be probably word of mouth among the Veterans Network. And then, of course, that they have to be willing to abstain. That's a tough thing. 2 weeks of abstinence is going to be tricky, so we'll see. So I didn't want to bore you with this, but I did want to just give you some insight into the barriers to research. So I'm going to show you, this is what was talked about earlier, is, marijuana was added to the pharmacopoeia in the U.S. a long time ago, 1850s. We added this for all these different illnesses, right? And unfortunately, in 1970, they set up the Controlled Substances Act, which sadly, ruined things for marijuana research, because now suddenly it became a dangerous drug of no medical benefit. This is how, drugs are scheduled in the U.S. So you can see here, no medical benefit, high abuse potential, Schedule 1. This is an absurd situation, right? Because the scheduling of drugs in the U.S. is done by law enforcement professionals, right? They're DEA. The DEA decides which drugs go into each of these schedules. And so a lot of people are arguing that we should have all of these schedules reconfigured by medical professionals who actually understand. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the actual list of the drugs that are in these different schedules, but here you'll see in Schedule 1 that marijuana, which is remarkably low toxicity, is lumped in with all these highly addictive, highly toxic psychedelic drugs. It's really bizarre. And then you've got Schedule 4, which the DEA has defined as, low abuse potential, and yet you've got drugs like Xanax and Ativan, lorazepam, all these drugs that have very high street value, very high potential for dependency. So the scheduling is just absolutely inexplicable. And the good news is, we've had champions like Dr. Gupta make statements like this, which have really helped. I'm just going to read this because I think this is really important. He said, I mistakenly believed the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, that Schedule 1 listed marijuana as a Schedule 1 substance, because he thought that it was sound scientific proof for this. Surely the DEA must have some quality reasoning as to why they put it in Schedule 1, that it would have no accepted medical benefit. But he goes on to say, no, they didn't have the science to support that claim. And I now know that when it comes to marijuana, neither of these things is true, that marijuana doesn't have high potential for abuse, and that there are that there are medical applications for marijuana. We have been terribly and systematically misled for nearly 70 years in the U.S. And he says, I apologize for my own role in this. That was a huge breakthrough when he came out publicly with this statement, and we're really fortunate. So now we have about 34 states in the U.S. that have legalized some form of medical marijuana. Some it's just CBD only, cannabidiol extracts and things. But this is a really big achievement, right? We have all these states that are acknowledging that marijuana might be medicine for patients. This is huge. The problem is that they can't actually, let's see, that's the end. The problem is that they can't actually do research. These states that have medical marijuana laws want to study it, and yet they can't. And so that's what's really frustrating. I don't know, for some reason my thing is stopped here, but I'll just tell you, the two biggest obstructions that we have in the United States now are a public health service review and a NIDA monopoly. Those are the things that impede marijuana research in this country. That's why our study has not been allowed to be implemented. We submitted the study design in 2010, and here we are, so many years later, still unable to get this study underway. And so I think that what we're hoping to do over the next year is start working with other countries to take this protocol and implement it in with governments that are more permissive, that are more open. For instance, we just partnered with Tilray. You guys probably heard Tilray. Philippe Lucas is from Canada. He's with Tilray's one of the largest marijuana cultivators in Canada. And they've taken our protocol and they're implementing it with a slightly different twist. They're going to look at PTSD of all causes, not just military vets. And they're going to look only at vaporizing. So that helped us because we initially were going to look at smoking and vaporizing as two, that they would be randomized into one or the other. Now we're just looking at smoking because they're taking the vaporizer side of it, which is great. So this is how I'm hoping we can get studies underway in other countries. We just had, some great luck here at this conference. We already got an offer from the doctor from Austria. You might have met him. He wants to implement the protocol out there, which would be great because I don't know. I'm starting to lose hope if we're ever going to be able to do this. Even though we have a $2 million grant from the government, we still don't have any marijuana study drugs. So it's a deeply frustrating situation. Let me take some questions from you guys. Anybody have anything you want to ask? Yeah.
The question is, you were talking about 1 month of washout period, plus possibly some extra time of placebo. This may mean that some people just don't need any drug to cope with their PTSD, so they're not so severely ill. Aren't you afraid that there may be some help? They may want to help themselves with some pharmaceutical drugs, which you are not monitoring, I guess.
No, you're right. Yeah, you mean during that washout period and things like that?
And during the study itself.
Yeah. That would be a deal breaker for them if they end up using adjunct. Yeah, they wouldn't be allowed to do. It's part of their informed consent. No,
maybe there will be a high dropout rate then.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, so that's all part of it, though. I mean, I think that's going to help us, in the analysis later, once we unblind the study. I think we'll be able to put a lot of that together and start to understand. If people make choices like that, that's all adds to the total information that we have about why people make these decisions, So it's a really good point, and I think hopefully it'll. Oh yeah.
Accessorize out and everything out.
We're right now. Yeah, no, it's a good point. Right now we're negotiating because initially the FDA had said no psychoactive drugs because they thought it would confound the data if we allowed them to be on concurrent psychiatric meds. That people would say, oh well, it was their Zoloft that helped them. It wasn't the marijuana. But we're to your point, we're trying to negotiate some compromise. So we'll see. I'm gonna, since you brought it up, I'm gonna bring it up with our team again and see if we should look at that. It's a good point. It's really good. Yeah.
I just actually have one more little comment before you were talking about long-term benefit, and I would add that there is actually one. As a patient advocate, I've observed one very serious and positive long-term benefit, and that is it restores hope. That once a patient, whether it's epilepsy, whether it's post-traumatic stress, any of these conditions where they fought so hard and had no relief, to know that they found relief, even if you take that relief away, you've restored hope that there is relief somewhere.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. Yeah, very good. There you go.
Okay, thank you for the talk and the presentation. My question is, do you think at the end of the day your main goal could be to achieve like an approved drug by the FDA? And if yes, what do you think under which conditions regarding especially the different strains, genetics, contents, whatever we have talked about all days.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
that's a great point. Yeah, so that's exactly what we were trying to achieve, is we were trying to take whole plant, raw marijuana through the entire FDA drug development process and eventually see marijuana have an FDA indication to be on the market, suddenly competing with other drugs that were, produced by big pharma. People are like, oh, there's no way, they're like, that's, decades away. The truth is, it's not really that far away. If we can get study drug from NIDA within the next few months, let's just say a miracle happens and they learn how to grow CBD-rich marijuana and suddenly we have all the strains that we need. This is what they're claiming, by the way. I just got a letter from NIDA saying, we're getting closer. We may have the marijuana for you by May. So they're getting a lot of pressure, you can imagine, because this study is now getting so much attention, especially a lot of media pressure on them to produce this the study drug. So if we get it done, if we start the study in May or June, you can bet that it's probably going to take us about 2 years to get data that's publishable. Yeah. Wait. Let me see. Let me walk you through this here and see. So let's say in 3 years we would have data published in peer-reviewed medical journals showing the results of this, the good and the bad. Everything goes in. If the FDA, if the data looks favorable from phase 2, then we go to phase 3. And phase 2, rather than just looking at 76 veterans in 2 sites, phase 3 will be 1,000 veterans at 30 different sites around the country, right? So and that study would take another 2 years. So the truth is that, 3 years plus another 3 years, it's possible that in 6 to 7 years, once it passes through phase 3, it suddenly has an FDA indication to be on the market. And the huge issue with that is that suddenly patients would be able to get insurance companies would be required to have raw marijuana on their formulary if it had an FDA indication. And the other, game changer about this is that the mainstream medical community, at least in the U.S., mainstream medical community won't come near this until it's gone through the rigors of the FDA approval process. So that's why I'm so committed to doing it, because, I can't talk to my peers about marijuana because they don't want to hear it until it becomes FDA approved. And so if you think about the fact that within 6 to 7 years, that is possible, that a patient could use their insurance card to get raw marijuana from a pharmacy or wherever, that would be a big achievement and would make, and it would then remain in the nonprofit realm. MAPS, my sponsor, this nonprofit MAPS, is hoping to be the nonprofit pharmaceutical company to manage raw marijuana. So they would keep it, deliberately, prices very low, deliberately easily accessible to patients, very high quality flowering plant material, not the stuff NIDA is selling us. So this is the dream, but it's not really, it seems accessible. I know Dr. Resnick is skeptical, but I think we're going to do it. We'll come back in 7 years and revisit this and see where we're at. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, go.
Já jsem adiktolog.
Well, I'm an addictologist.
Jsem trošku skeptický.
And I'm also a bit skeptical.
Oh, good, yeah.
Těm klientům, kteří už měli zkušenost s konopím.
In respect of those clients who have already used cannabis.
Yeah.
A mají pozitivní zkušenost.
And whose experience has been positive.
Yeah.
But I do wish you all the best from the bottom of my heart. But I'd like to tell you one thing. concerning what you define as placebo.
Yeah.
Vy jste označili placebo konopím, které má 2% THC.
Because I believe that you define placebo as cannabis containing 2% of THC.
Sorry, it was supposed to be 0% THC. They leach out all the cannabinoids, take them all out. So it looks the same.
Okay, okay, yes, I get. Yeah.
Já jsem chtěl navázat tím,
But I'd like to follow up on this.
že vy používáte pojem marihuana
Well, you also use the term, the concept marijuana.
a přitom máte v těch programech neomamné odrůdy konopí.
But you, in your programs, you have non-hallucinogenic varieties of cannabis.
A myslím si, že používání pojmu marihuana nám strašně všem škodí.
And I think that it does a lot of harm to all of us if we use this particular term, if we call cannabis marijuana.
Že když se,
That's so interesting. I keep going back and forth with this. I want to see who. We should take a little survey here because I go back and forth with people. My gut feeling is that. You see, you're a horticulturist, so that's why you're going with the proper name. But I deliberately use the word marijuana because we're surrounded by so many enemies of marijuana that I don't want to shroud it and, you know, potentially make them more comfortable with it. I'm not interested in making their life easier. I want them to understand that this is what we're studying. We're not hiding it. It's not hiding it with the term cannabis. This is the green leafy substance. It's not a cannabis extract. It's marijuana. Deal with it, you know?
Yeah. So my last
that's a
comment,
good
my last remark.
Yeah.
vy jste říkala, jak to má výborný na záněty.
Well, you said that it had an excellent anti-inflammatory effect.
Takováhle velká konference byla naposledy
Well, there was a big conference
v České republice před 60
6 years ago in what is now the Czech Republic.
profesor Kabelík
And at that time, Professor Kabelík,
řekl tehdy, že konopí bude antibiotikem 21.
well, he said cannabis will be the antibiotic of the 21st century.
Really? Oh my God.
Právě studie na kanabidiolových základech
And this is a study, a CBD-based study.
Wow, that is fascinating. Is he published or is this? Oh, really? Okay, I have to get.
He is a teacher for Lumir Hanu,
Yeah.
Professor Craig, Professor
Oh, that's.
and Lumir Hanu, she's their student.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, I love it.
Research in Hebrew University.
Really? Okay. Well, this is great. So you think that the anti-inflammatory data is going to pan out? Yeah. Huh. That'll be interesting.
Well,
Pozitivní efekt na neomamný konopí.
I think that many patients will react positively to the possibility of having a non-hallucinogenic cannabis.
Yeah. That's right. You mean it's changing stop using the term marijuana. This is good.
This is exactly what I use for my in my non-epileptic
Oh, I
patients.
see. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to talk to you more after. I want to hear more about the. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me.
That's okay.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Comment first? Antimicrobial doesn't mean anti-inflammatory. They're
Right.
different things.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well,
That they didn't he say they were studying both or no? I assumed it was both. Oh. Oh, he's here. Okay, good. All right.
yeah. I am reminded of what happened in the countries that studied the prescription, or the, how do you say it, when they started to give out heroin to heroin addicted people, and that in Switzerland and later also in Holland and now in a number of countries. We gave, I was at the Municipal Health Service in Amsterdam, the drugs department, when this started. And the problem then was that you're going to study how they live when they get the heroin from the government, from the medical service, to people who already have been using heroin for years, but then street quality. Right. So the point is then, what you study is not simply the effect of heroin, but you study the effect of the change in their social situation. Plus, that they can be certain that their next dosage will be arranged. They don't have to worry about the dosages, and they don't have the whole social problems for getting their heroin from their dealer. So what you're studying is really something different than simply the effect of if I go back to your study. Now, you cannot compare, of course, the addiction to heroin to even to, let's say, dependent users of cannabis or people who have been using. Yes, the word cannabis is simply the biological word for marijuana and hashish. So when I first heard of your study, I thought you would restrict that to people with PTSD who had only had the regular treatments, but who had not had marijuana. It gets a lot more complicated when you do this with people who have been using marijuana for a while as treatment of their PTSD. That's a very different situation. You're mostly studying then the social effects of this change in their life.
Probably you presented on my previous lecture, because I published it 2-3 years ago, first naturalistic observational study for 200 Israel post-traumatic disorder patients. I follow up them until 5 years, and it was a really large group of the patients. I divided them on some subsections. Some of them were pure PTSD patients. Some of them suffered with pain disorder. Some of them suffered with pain disorder and depression. And I follow up them for 5 years in the same secure situation that they assured that they already got a license. So they had a constant access to licensed good quality marijuana for about nothing, just less than $100 a month. Is supposed to use a very symbolic price for this high quality marijuana. And for some of them, Ministry of Defense, for some of them who were veterans, the supply was absolutely free. It's according to the Israel law, veterans are supplied any kind of medical materials absolutely free, and I suppose the same situation in the United States, the same law. But I would like to say, for the 5 years of continuous follow-up of such group of the patients, the improvement, or I see in these 3 not so different groups, but the difference is a comorbidity. So they have the same social security situation, and quality of life in them improved, and in the patients for more significant features improved in the 2 other categories when the patient had comorbidity. In the group of so-called pure PTSD patients, the PTSD, the CAP scores did not change significantly. The quality of life improved also, but it was in good comparison with the other groups where the cannabis worked much better. This was my observation. This is the first observational trial. So it is not randomized, it is not controlled, it's just naturalistic, large series study. But I am saying that in the same security, this is why I'm very happy for your question about the security situation, that people were assured that they will next month, they have the same dosage for the symbolic price, with good quality, but in this situation, the improvement is much more in the subgroup of PTSD patients, either with depression or pain disorder.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Go. Let's do.
Just a remark, not a question, really. I understand that the marijuana you will use will come from NIDA. I don't know whether from Mississippi, but it doesn't matter. One of the main obstacles for the scientific research on marijuana in the US was the unavailability of good quality marijuana. Yeah. And now I understand there will be new strains with new potencies. So that may mean that the scientific research will start to boom in the US. A question is NIDA going suicidal?
I mean, they're growing CBD-rich marijuana just for our study right now. So this is a whole new dimension for that. They have no track record of ever growing CBD. All they've ever grown is high THC marijuana, and then of course making placebo. But yeah, so it's a new chapter for them, and I think that, they just put out a, what do you call it, an RFP, request for they're starting to realize that they're inept, that they can't keep up with the demand of all these states. We have, 11... It's 11 states that have CBD-only laws now, and they want access to CBD-rich marijuana so that they can study it, and NIDA has not been able to produce it. So I think this monopoly, what's probably going to happen is, Bedrocan or one of these, giant growers outside of the U.S. is going to open a drug master file with our FDA and prove that they have GMP grade marijuana, and then they'll be allowed to import. Once they can prove that to the FDA, we can import their study drug and go around NIDA finally. But we can't do that yet. We've been begging Bedrocan for years. Yeah. Oh, is that right? Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you know? Yeah. Can you say that?
I just wanted to maybe clarify a little bit on the reputation of the marijuana or cannabis, certainly from NIDA. The case that produced the situation now where we have patients in the United States still to this day that receive marijuana under what was called the Compassionate Investigative New Drug Program. It was started by patient 0 was Bob Randall, who of course won a court case forcing the federal government to supply his marijuana, and in the case they requested marijuana cigarettes. It was a mistake. The marijuana cigarettes, to do this, to roll cigarettes, the federal government asked R.J. Reynolds, right near me in Virginia, to help them roll these cigarettes, and they gave them an old cigarette rolling machine from tobacco. And they weren't able to take the sticky, high resin buds and put them into this machine and come out with cigarettes. They had to first desiccate the plant material, put it on a beater bar system, which beat it into its constituent parts, and then take just the leafy material, rehydrate it, roll it into cigarettes, and then re-dehydrate it again, minus all the, the keefy resin that was lost in the beater bar system. And this is the cigarettes after maybe as much as 10 years on the shelf at NIDA, then this desiccated cigarettes are then delivered to the patients. I know from working with Dr. Musty, Professor Musty and others, that the cannabis from NIDA is a very high quality if you can avoid the cigarette rolling machine. So I think that they actually can produce a good product. Whether they will for you, I don't know, but in the past, I just want to, I don't know. I hate to defend NIDA, but...
Do you, Ilya brought up the issue of veterans receiving marijuana for free. Is that something that...
It's in the pharmacy.
That's what they're.
But like prisons, the VA has a great deal of difficulty in prescribing off-label when it's a very high-profile drug. So it might be a situation where it'll only be available for whatever you get on label. But it should be available for the vets in the system on or off-label for free.
It should be, but it's not.
Well, sometimes, like I said, like in prison, you know, they will tend to go only to on-label prescribing when they're put under pressure.
Right. But you thought it was, right? The vets in Israel get it free.
Well, it's on label.
Only exactly the same.
Yeah.
Only if it's issued license under the condition that it was recognized as the injury after army service.
Oh, that's it. And the Canadian system that Philippe talked about, the Canadian vets getting it free.
Yeah, same thing. It's on label. It's as prescribed.
Yeah. So
as prescribed and as approved.
Well, to me, I don't know if you heard Philippe say that they get 10 grams of marijuana per day for free. I mean, that's just a step, because we only allow in the study 2 grams a day.
Well, I think
2 grams? For is that right? Oh,
the federal government of the United States.
Oh, okay.
The federal government of the United States set a very high bar with those cigarettes, you see, because they deliver a can every month to these patients with 100 cigarettes in it, which is, you know, a fairly large amount of plant material when you add it up.
Yeah, so it's 2 grams.
300 cigarettes. Excuse me, 300 cigarettes.
Oh, I see. The doctor lays it out. Okay. Well, that's interesting that the doctor has control over that, because.
Licensing border in Israel and in Czech Republic, the licensing border authority, like medical cannabis authority, restricts the number of cannabis issued, and they're sending a paper of it to Veteran Administration in Israel, and they pay directly to suppliers. It's about between 60 grams to 100 grams. It's about 100 cigarettes a month. About.
Well, this has been fascinating. Is there anybody else who has any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll let you guys take a break. Anybody else? Good. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you all very much. Oh, there we go. Thanks.
You're welcome. So my girlfriend wrote me she gave me the sign.
Oh, good. All right.
That's not uncomfortable. They overwork something.